Hello everyone, welcome to Z Academy. I'm your host ZJ, and today's topic would be on props. To start off, I would first like to provide a short introduction on what props are. Then I will introduce the various ways that you would be able to pass props into components and how you would be able to access them. Next, I will move on to how you would be able to provide default values for props and how to rename them. So, what are props? Props is an abbreviation for properties, so I'll be using these two terms interchangeably throughout this video and in the rest of my videos as well. Props is also the main mechanism for passing data or even handlers to components, allowing for data sharing and user interactions on websites. Props is also read-only and immutable, meaning that once it is set in the parent component, you will not be able to change the value of the prop. Lastly, props are also really similar to attributes in HTML tags, such that you can create your own attributes, which are props. Now, let's move on to VS Code and check out how we would be able to pass props into components. Before we start, I would like to clarify that you can basically pass anything in as props. Strings, integers, functions, lists, objects, components, anything. For this video, I would mainly only be touching on strings and integers. However, I would also be touching on some of these other types in other videos of this tutorial series, so do stay tuned for that as well. Now, let's start off by running our React application on our local machine using the npm start command. If you are planning to follow along in this video, I would recommend you to get the latest version of the CSS file from the link in the description below. Now, let's head right into the topic. Passing props into components is really easy. All we have to do is simply define a name for the property and give it some kind of value. Let me demonstrate that here. For this functional component here, let me give it a property called num. And for this num property, I would give it a value of 1. We can either provide the property with the value directly or provide it with the value of a variable. What I mean by that is that we can define a variable called number and give it a value of 1. Then we can simply wrap this number around the curly braces to get the value and set it to the num property. So essentially, this two is the same. There is also something special about the Boolean props. So any property that does not have a defined value would be defaulted to a value of true. And what I mean by that is that if I give this functional component a property of center, then this property would have a default value of true. So essentially, this is the same as this. Both are acceptable. Now, let me quickly populate all these other components. Now, you may be wondering that it is really bothersome to be numbering each of these components manually. Yes, there's an easier way to achieve this, and that is through list rendering. However, in this video, I will not be touching on that topic. If you are interested in that, do check out my other videos in this tutorial series. Now that we have passed props into these functional components, let's learn how we can access these components. Let's head into the functional component file. So in order to access the props in components, we would have to give the function a parameter called props. Now, you may be wondering what value props holds. We can check that out by logging the value of props to the console. Here, we can see that props has two properties, center and num. And these are the properties that we have defined in the app component here. Now that we know what props contains, we can easily access these values from props directly by simply doing props.num and enclosing this in a curly braces. It is important to note that if we want to access the value of any variables within this return block, we would have to wrap it in this curly braces. We are currently not seeing the number because the text is currently black, which blends into the background. So let's give this a font color of white. And then we can now see the numbers within these black boxes. Another way that we can access the properties from props is through object destructuring. Now, this is a concept in JavaScript that is used really commonly in React. So if you're unfamiliar with this topic, I would recommend you reading up on that yourself. But to put it simply, object destructuring allows us to get the properties in props, and we can do it in this way. Const curly braces, and we would have to get the property name here, which would be num equals props. Now what this is basically doing is that it is getting the property num from props and putting it in a variable num that we can use. So we can simply change this to num and it would still work the same. Now what if we have defined 10 different properties for each functional component, and we would like to pass that into a component in functional component? Yes, there's an easy way to do that, and that is through the spread operator. Let me demonstrate that to you, but first, let's create a component called box numbering. And in this box numbering component, I would essentially want this whole code over here. Now, let's do the same thing and destructure num from props. Now, let's get back into the functional component here and include the box numbering component. Now, we can easily pass all of these properties in app into the box numbering component through the spread operator. So essentially, if we log props to the console here, we would be able to see num and center. And there. Now this spread operator is really useful, especially when you want to pass props from one component into another component that is many levels below. Now that we have a solid understanding of how to access and pass props, let's move on to how we can set the default value for props. Setting the default value for props is also really easy. All we have to do is simply set the value when we are destructuring it from props. Let me show that here. We can also deconstruct center from props and set it to a value of true. Now, if we remove center from the first functional component here, it will still print a value of true when we log it to the console. Let's go ahead and log it here. And we can see that there's truth and false. So basically, if the property is not defined here, then it would take on the default value. It is also really easy to rename the property to another value. This could be really useful when there is a naming conflict and you would only need to rename the prop in one or some of the components. Since the properties could be passed in from a component that is a few levels above, it would be worth renaming the property instead of changing the property names throughout all of the components where it is used. And in order to rename properties, all we have to do is to simply do a colon with the new name, number. Then all we have to do is simply change all the instances to the new name. And that is how we rename properties. We could also rename properties and set the default value at the same time as well. Let's rename center to be vertically centered. Now, let me quickly write out simple logic to check if the number should be vertically centered in the box. And there, we have vertically centered it. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to Z Academy for more React content. And if you liked this video or found it useful, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. I would definitely love to hear from you. Thank you for watching and being part of the Z Academy community. Your support means a lot. Thank you.